Welcome back. We keep our best talks for last. So I manage personally 50 certificates on my server with cert-manager, which to me seems like a lot, but we found somebody who manages more than I do, namely tens of thousands of certificates, one for every website they host at render.com. So you're up for our next speaker. Hello, Anurag. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good.
All right, so very happy to get started. I think we're using cert-manager in a fairly unique way, and we might be able to help with some some scaling issues that you might have as you start adding more certs to your own um, infrastructure. But give me just 1 second. Let me mute the other YouTube stream I have going. Uh,
That'd be great. I was wondering what I was hearing.
yeah, sorry.
No
Okay.
worries.
Okay, is this better?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about render first, because most of you have probably not heard of render. We are a some kind of a mix, I'd say, of a platform as a service and an infrastructure as a service provider. So obviously, we render can do everything that something like Heroku can do, but we can do more. For example, we can give you access to block storage, and we can give you access to private networking that's built completely transparently. So once you create your account, you just have your own private network. You don't even realize it, but it just works, and you can address services by name. And there's a bunch of other features that are built to prevent migration to infrastructure as a service providers and to prevent migrations to giant DevOps teams. So our goal is to make sure that you don't have to build out a huge DevOps team and you don't have to migrate to AWS. And we make starting really easy. A little bit about the company. It was founded in early 2018. And then we launched later in 2019, launched publicly in 2019. We had been in early access for a while. And then last October, about a year ago, we won TechCrunch Disrupt Battlefield. For those of you who might have seen Silicon Valley, that's the competition. At this point, we have tens of thousands of users and websites and developers and businesses and teams, and we're growing really quickly. And most of these people on our platform, including Render itself, all the things that we use on Render, we need certificates. We need Acme certificates, and we use Let's Encrypt for it. And we could not be more thankful for the existence of both Let's Encrypt and cert-manager. We've had some really high-profile users, or we still do. The had bit applies to Pete Buttigieg. For those of you who follow American politics, he was a presidential primary candidate, and his old campaign ran on Render, and it was really interesting to see all the spikes during the debates. But we also have established companies like Stripe, where I used to work, and the front-end end-to-end testing framework, Cypress and NYU, and other customers. If you go to render.com, you'll see some logos. Our backend is all Go and Docker and Kubernetes. We also run some stuff outside Kubernetes, and we run across multiple clouds. So we use GCP and AWS, and also a couple of other providers. And then we have regions, customer regions in the US and in Europe, and we're opening up an Asia region shortly, and that will most likely be on bare metal, but obviously none of that is visible to our users. That's mostly for performance and cost. You can probably read these tweets, and if you go search for Get Render on Twitter or just render.com on Twitter, you'll see just how much um, developers love using render, and a lot of it just comes from how easy it is to provision certificates. I mean, that's part of it, but without it, I don't think we would be as valuable to people. In fact, we can provision wildcard certs for people without managing their DNS. And I think we might be unique in that. And the only reason we can do that is because of cert-manager. So we've been issuing, or we currently have, like I said, tens of thousands of certificates. And then if you count renewals, we're just constantly hammering both cert-manager and Let's Encrypt. And we're very grateful for that. This is a little bit about our stack. So we do have everything on Let's Encrypt. Pretty much all the certificates we issue are Acme. There's almost no certificates that aren't. And then we started using cert-manager back in October 2018, and that was V 0.6.0, a long time ago. This was before the migration where you had to delete everything after taking backup, of course, and then re-import everything, and it was really painful, but we got through it, even with tens of thousands of certificates. So yeah, we've seen cert-manager evolve quite a bit over the last 2 years, and it's been amazing. It's been really great to see the community come together, and Jetstack, of course, taking such good care of everything around the ecosystem and obviously the code base. And as a Go shop, it's been especially helpful because we can just dig into the code and interact with the code directly. So we don't actually create any user certificates using YAML. It's impossible to manage that kind of volume with YAML, even if we generate all of it. So all of our certs are created in our Go code using the cert-manager custom APIs, using their CRDs, and we use cert-manager, the Go module, to create these certs. And that was why I asked a question about client Go compatibility earlier. We've had some issues where cert-manager needed a specific version of client Go, and some other libraries in our code needed a different version. And given Go modules the way they are, they don't support different versions of indirect dependencies. It can become messy. But anyway, we got around that. And we don't use Helm at all. We try not to. We use static manifests for upgrading cert-manager, and we use cert-manager in a lot of clusters. There's one instance per cluster, and it has really helped us scale up our overall infrastructure in a way that allows for issuing certificates wherever we need them. The primary usage for these certificates is in our distributed load balancers in all our regions, where we load the certificates that are created in memory into the load balancers that terminate TLS. And this happens in real time. As certificates are created and issued and renewed, the load balancers reflect the latest values. And that allows us to offer our users TLS termination, obviously, and we don't use ingresses because we've had some bad experiences with ingresses. But more importantly, I think, given our scale, ingresses don't really work for what we're trying to do. Not just our scale, but also as we expand to non-HTTP services, we already have a non-HTTP load balancer that serves our Postgres offering, where you can connect to postgres.us.render.com and you access your database from outside the cluster. So ingresses don't really work for us, but cert-manager is great because you have access to all of the pretty much all of the certificate data and the secrets, and so we just load them wherever they're needed. And we'll talk a little bit about the flow on the right-hand side in a little bit. Most of our certs are HTTP/01 validations through Let's Encrypt. When our customers, obviously, when they require wildcard certificates and they need us to manage them, then we use DNS challenges with cert-manager, and they work great. And perhaps the biggest thing that cert-manager lets us do is manage certificates for both dynamic websites and static websites in one place within our infrastructure without depending on someone else who's issuing certificates. So we don't rely on ACM in AWS. We don't rely on Cloudflare or any other CDN provider to issue these certs for us. We have complete control, and we can import these certs into any kind of infrastructure as and when needed. So that's been great for someone like us because we use several different environments in the cloud. So just a quick recap of our flow. We start out by issuing requests from our API, our Go API, and then using the cert-manager Go libraries, ultimately to the cert-manager custom resources. And that's where, cert-manager creates a request and an order and a challenge. You're all probably familiar with that flow. And then for the challenge, it creates, at least for the HTTP/01 challenges, which are the majority of our challenges, it creates these Acme solver pods. And that is where we use an ingress, which cert-manager needs to create paths to solve these Acme challenges. But we don't really use anything inside that ingress directly. What we do is run a proxy which directs all the Let's Encrypt HTTP validation requests to our load balancers, which recognize it as a Let's Encrypt request, and then they backend to the solver ingress, which is simply backending to this service, which is responsible for making sure that we pick the right ingress path or right solver pod to redirect the request to. So the solver pod is available, and our proxy is basically taking the paths in the ingress and directing the request or proxying the request to the solver pod. So solver pods are happy, the challenge is solved, certs are created. So that's the creation flow. Then we have everything in green is stuff that happens after we create the cert. So we have an informer that's listening on cert creations in Kubernetes. And again, we use the CRD Go APIs, Golang APIs there. And as soon as we find a new certificate creation or a certificate update with new values, we run through a series of steps, including persisting the data, encrypted data in a database. And we have listeners on that database that load them into our load balancers. And then we also export the certificates to wherever they might be needed. So for example, we use some third-party CDNs and they allow us to import our own certs, and we use cert-manager issued certs in those cases. And so this flow has worked from the very beginning. It works great. We're able to issue HTTP01 challenges within almost always under 5 minutes, usually 2 to 3 minutes. And this is something that we keep track of because there are so many certs, and because the controller is going through its loop where it tries to reconcile everything. So that is a good transition to some of the things that we've learned over time that help with scale. The right-hand side is just an image of like all our PRs that we've raised, and up until now, I was sort of the primary person at Render until fairly recently, responsible for dealing with cert-manager and coding up those flows. But as we've grown and as we've added more people to our team, more people have gotten involved, and I'm slowly transitioning away from our cert-manager infrastructure, but I'm still quite involved. And so a lot of these PRs have been, they bring back memories from, going back all the way to when we upgraded to 0.7 in late 2018. But one of the things that I'm sure a lot of you run into is Let's Encrypt limits. And I think it's different for us because a lot of the certs that we create are for our individual subdomains. And we create individual certs for our subdomains, which are of the form yoursite.onrender.com. We create individual certs for them instead of using a wildcard cert because we don't want to export secret keys to infrastructure that we don't control. Or we don't want to export our wildcard secret key to anywhere outside Render's infrastructure. So it's a security thing, really. And so we create a cert for every domain and the www version of the Apex domain. And that obviously leads to a lot of requests to Let's Encrypt, and especially when you count renewals. So we get around the limits because we are on the public suffix list, which is an interesting thing we discovered as we were running into these limits. The public suffix list allows hosts like Render who are giving away subdomains to have higher limits. Let's Encrypt internally uses the PSL to decide on limits. And then we also sponsor Let's Encrypt. That is not, again, that's not a workaround to get higher limits, but it helps because we have people we have access to folks at Let's Encrypt who we can get in touch with when things go wrong. But it's almost never needed. I think we're at a point where we haven't had to reach out to Let's Encrypt in months now. So, but early on, I think it was useful. And they're also pretty responsive in their forums. So overall, again, super happy with Let's Encrypt and all the people there. We've had to tune some parameters. So the max concurrent challenge is perhaps the biggest one for us. This is a hidden parameter. It doesn't really show up in the docs except for maybe in the troubleshooting section. And this allows us to have as many challenges as we need at any given times. And this controls, so cert-manager internally does not create a new challenge if you have exceeded this limit, which is set to, I think, maybe 40 or something in the workflow, in the code. And obviously we have tons of challenges going on at any given time, and so we need to tune that limit. And then we've also, there is the CNAME strategy parameter, but that's an issuer parameter. And so for our wildcard certs, we use the strategy, which is extremely helpful because we don't host DNS for our users yet. So all we ask for them is to point to a subdomain, a unique subdomain within render that we can access. And then for that CNAME, we can manage the DNS challenge. And that works great. And I was so happy to see the CNAME follow strategy when it was added to cert-manager. Sorry, I got a weird, oh, hold on. Okay, you can still see my screen, great. So another thing that we've had to think about over the last 2 years is just Kubernetes versioning and dealing with client Go, and we're super happy to see 1.0 for this reason. The problems that we've run into with Kubernetes version specifically are more around being stuck with GKE having older versions. And so when we moved to other clouds, we just started managing our own kube clusters with kubeadm and soon cluster API, which looks great. And so sometimes we weren't able to upgrade the versions as frequently as we'd like, but we still wanted new cert-manager functionality. And so there were sort of some incompatibilities there, but I think we're in good shape now. And again, cert-manager has been great at helping with detailed upgrade instructions. I think if you're ever upgrading, there is the standard upgrade flow where you just update your manifest or use Helm, but they always have instructions that are version specific, and they're extremely detailed. You can literally just copy paste a lot of those things, and we're very grateful for that. It's not that easy to kind of anticipate all the ways in which a new version can fail, and I think it speaks to the quality of the cert-manager team, where they do anticipate these things, and they are diligent enough to write docs for them. So that's a little bit about sort of some of the things that we've learned, and I'm sure we'll continue to learn more as we scale even more. We've definitely had some issues with the 1.0 release, which I think we, again, because of our internal client Go versions, but we're looking forward to fixing that in the next couple of days. Cool. So things that you absolutely should be doing when you're managing all these certs like we do, unit and integration testing for cert issuing. So cert-manager has this nice little package which helps us test it in our own tests without needing access to the Kube API, the fake client set. And that works great whenever we need it. But also for these tests, we've used github.com/maxbrunsfeld/counterfeiter. If you have code in Go, counterfeiter works really well to generate all kinds of dependencies that you wouldn't have access to in unit tests and integration tests. And then for end-to-end testing, we use the amazing Let's Encrypt Pebble server, which is meant only for testing, not for production. They make it very clear on their README over and over again. But it helps us test these flows before we roll out any upgrades or any changes to our cert infrastructure. And we're always thinking about ways in which the system can break, and testing doesn't go all the way. I wish it did, but there are some things that you just need to test in production. And so we're always making backups, or at least regularly. I wish we were backing up our certs more frequently, but that's an issue, open issue. And we're constantly making sure that our certificates are being issued within a certain time, because our users are very sensitive to that. They can't start using their new custom domains on render or even their on render domains unless a cert is issued. And we have this certificate pending status in our dashboard for them to see, and they want it to turn to green ASAP. And so it is important for us to make sure that that happens quickly, because we need to, we want to avoid questions around, hey, why is my cert not being issued? It's been an hour. And that has happened at times, and we've caught these issues and subsequently fixed them. So it's an ongoing thing. I think cert-manager, until now, it hasn't been at a point where we can just set it and forget it for our volume. But I don't think that will ever be the case for something like this that involves so many moving parts. And so it's always essential to be monitoring things in addition to having tests in place. Another thing that we realized as we were running this is cert-manager itself the controller has a sync loop. And I think by default, it's set to sync every 60 seconds or so. And it's a resync loop, really. And we need to dig a little bit more into it. But for our use case, the resync loop for every 60 seconds going over, 20, 30,000 more certificates and resyncing them just doesn't work, because it blocks the other certificates from being synced or created. And so one of the things we noticed was in our watcher that we're looking where we're looking for new cert issuances and things like that, we're actually making sure that we give enough time for the sync to happen before starting a new loop, and that allows us to issue new certs as and when they get created. So I think that is, at a very high level, our cert-manager story. Let's open it up to Q&A. And you have my email, and you can reach us in render.com/chat.
Thank you very much. I didn't see how many certificates issued. Yeah, I have one question from Josh, but you already answered that during your talk about the scaling issues of the controller itself. A second one from the chat is, who carries out the anti-phishing checks?
Who carries out the anti-phishing checks where? Here? What does here mean, Dhruv?
I think that means...
You mean at render?
I think the whole platform.
So we have a separate system for that. cert-manager isn't really involved there. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm not understanding the question correctly. But we can move on.
Are there any other questions? Now is the time to post it in the chat over there, and now I'm pointing in the right direction.
Another thing on scaling the controller, we just throw a lot of resources at it. I think vertical scaling goes a long way until it doesn't. And we're looking forward to being able to run multiple cert-manager controllers in our cluster at some point. And I think that might be something that we contribute to cert-manager code if and when we need it. For now, that's been fine.
PR is welcome. I don't think there are any questions. You can still contact on your email if they have some. You can also probably still go in the YouTube chat a few minutes after. So thank you very much. It was a very interesting talk.
Oh, sorry, there's just one more question from Josh. Are you using the certificate request resource directly? No, we're using the certificate resource. We're not using the request. We let cert-manager create the request. So we just issue a creation request using the certificate Yeah, you're right. It should be possible, but we're not going to mess with cert requests if you guys already know how to handle that.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, and if you have more questions, yeah, like I said, feel free to reach out over email or render.com/chat, which is our general user community Slack. And you don't need an invite to sign up there. You can just sign up.
That's amazing. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
So this is the end of the Cert Manager Community Day. Thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you, everybody in the chat room, for asking questions. Thank you to my Dell XPS over there, who's been handling this very well all day. Thank you to my mixer. Thank you to all the Cert Manager team for contributing to this. I can't say thank you enough today. I hope we can maybe do this a second time. We'll have to look into that. But thank you very much for joining, everybody. See you next time.